Even before Hurricane Ian, our firm received hundreds of calls every day about vehicles that were purchased at salvage auctions that were flooded that are no longer eligible for a title. Many of these vehicles have been purchased from auctions like Copart, IAA, and they may have been sold 2 or 3 times after the auction to unwitting buyers who purchased a vehicle without a title and didn't know that these vehicles are no longer eligible for a title. Just because a car can be fixed or is in good condition doesn't mean that it can ever be titled. Many of these cars have VIN numbers that have been entered into a federal database called the National Motor Vehicle Title Information System. These VIN numbers have been effectively canceled as being eligible for titling or registration ever in the future. It's an irreversible process. Now look at these cars on the screen. You see this one in the front here obviously had water, up into the engine compartment. But even these ones farther back, they may only have water up to the wheels. Some of these cars, even if they can be repaired or physically look okay, are never able to be titled or registered on the road again. Once an insurance company pays a claim of a total loss, which normally will happen, that vehicle now has to be sold through a salvage auction. And a lot of times in the past, you may have been able to buy and sell cars from salvage auctions, fix them up, and get a salvage title. Not so easy in the future. Many of these cars have had their titling privileges revoked for that VIN number. Here's why. This car obviously is going to have major rust and corrosion in major body panels and mechanical components of the vehicle. The engine, transmission, drivetrain, brakes, shocks. Now look at this one right behind the stop sign. It only comes up about halfway above the center of the wheel. However, that water made its way into major components like the anti-lock brake sensors, into the subframe, into the fuel components. Much of the wiring and many of the computers are actually under the seats of the vehicle. So a lot of that mechanical and electrical equipment has become corroded or will be corroded in the future. Because of that, the repair of the vehicle might not seem that significant. You might look at this vehicle, it gets dried off, it gets washed, maybe the carpets are replaced, maybe some of the underneath of the vehicle's subframe components are cleaned or repaired, but the vehicle will never be the same. It may be a year, maybe 2 years down the road, the components that had saltwater intrusion in between the spot welded joints in between where frame and suspension components are bolted together, it's going to start rusting, right? And even if, for some reason, the vehicle is allowed to be titled, the vehicle is never going to survive past a few years. So you want to avoid these vehicles at all costs. Now, sometimes you won't even know this is the case. Sometimes you'll see a vehicle like even this one in the front, this gray, looks like a Honda Accord, may be presented, and it looks like a perfectly fine vehicle. The water is not going to do any physical damage that you'll be able to see. You might notice maybe on the inside some musty smell or some damage inside the doors, but it may not seem like a significantly damaged vehicle. However, the title is going to show salvage. So here's what you need to do. Run a history report. Now, don't use Carfax. Don't use any of these VIN checkers that you find online, because they're just really a $15 or $20 throwaway of your money. They're not 100% accurate. In fact, if you look at the bottom of the disclaimers of many of these sites, it'll tell you that it's missing a lot of information. It's not 100% accurate. The only way to get this information is directly from the DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles, or the titling authority in your state. Have them check it through the national database, not just their own database, the national database, to see if this vehicle had any kind of flood insurance claim around the time of Hurricane Ian, the last part of 2022 or the beginning of 2023. If the vehicle had a flood claim in Florida, don't buy it. Doesn't matter how cheap it is, doesn't matter how good of a deal you can get. The car is not going to be worth what it be reasonably expected to pay for a normal vehicle, even if it's a little bit more money. In fact, if you look at this Honda Accord, you might not think it's going to do a lot of damage, but when water seeps into this door panel, there's things inside there like your power window motors, your power door lock actuators, all the wiring that goes into those. And that can connect back to things like computers and sensors. Even this silver, what looks like a Honda Civic behind it, a lot of Hondas in this parking lot, these all look like Hondas, is going to have water that will soak up into that door panel and get into those parts. Even if it doesn't go as an actual water level, it'll seep up using capillary action into absorbent parts, even inside the seats, even inside of the engine compartment. It's going to get into things like the power steering rack. That's going to be at or below this level of the water. And those things over time will get salt water into the fluids, salt water into the different components, and it's going to ruin it. If you add up all the small parts you need to replace, it's going to be more than the value of the car. What's interesting is if you look at this Honda Accord in the front, ironically, this car already had a body repair. If you look at this front fender, it's a slightly different color gray than the back door, and even this seam here between the A-pillar, this is a slightly different color gray. This was a car that has been this fender at least repainted, maybe replaced, and the paint didn't match 100%, or maybe it matched when they did it, but over time it faded in a different rate as the rest of the car. So ironically, this is already a car with a collision repair or body repair, and now it's flooded. So these vehicles are going to have major title problems in the future. A lot of times what happens with clients is they'll buy these vehicles, they'll fix them up, then they'll go to try to get a title and find out you can't get one. Many of these cars, when they're sold at Copart, the buyer at Copart, who's a licensed dealer, they may know or should have known that the car is not eligible for a title, but you as a consumer who buys it later do not have access to that auction report or to that auction transmittal to know that this vehicle can never be titled. So the short answer is, don't buy one of these cars. It's more trouble than it's worth. Whatever thousands you think you're saving on buying the car, it's going to cost more than that to repair hidden damage, and not counting the fact that the resale value will always be less than a vehicle with a clean title.